Greetings, brethren, and welcome to another presentation from uph7.org. Today we're going to pick up a very important subject, discussing the story or the legacy of Don Adair. A lot of people, this name is well known amongst Davidian circles. So the questions we kind of want to address today in this presentation is, how did Don Adair rise to prominence in the Davidian movement? He's one of the major leaders over the last several decades. So that brings us to the point of what legacy did he leave behind? What were his contributions? What did he teach? What did he publish? Those are the type of things we want to evaluate here. Can we judge a man by what he's done? Well, the Bible says we can by their outward works. By their works you'll know them, by their fruit you'll know them. And so that's what we aim to do, not to attack character or get into personal matters, but just look at his legacy in terms of what he did as the leader of the Salem Association ever since the 1970s. And then it brings the question, since Don Adair now is no longer actively leading the association, he's basically incapacitated, he's still alive, as of the date of this publication, May 2023. But what will happen to the Salem Association? There's still people that follow his teachings. And then, are there any lessons for those of us who still claim to follow the original shepherd's rod that may not be in agreement with Salem? And I think there is. It's a time to reflect and examine ourselves as well when we look at the case of this particular Davidian. Now, the question might arise: well, who are you to, judge this man or whatever? Well, I'm in a unique position. My name's Brother Eric Edstrom. I'm the publishing director at uph7.org, and I am in a unique position to evaluate his legacy. When I came into the Rod Message in the year 2000, I contacted Don Adair, and while I was living in Texas, and then I later relocated to South Carolina, and I studied with Don Adair for 9 months, face to face, almost 3 times a week. So I got to know him quite well. I took copious notes in his studies. I know his method of his study. The topics, I still have records of all those notes, so I know exactly what he taught and had opportunity to interact with him and ask questions and so forth. We later parted ways after disagreements on various things, and since then I parted ways and had contact with him on and off over the years. But so yes, I'm in a position to share with you information from direct personal experience and also my research on his legacy and interviews with people that have been connected or associated with him in the past. So that's my background. Let's get into our presentation. We'll start with this text for meditation, reading from Testimonies for the Church, Volume 4, page 594, paragraph 1. It reads, Satan holds under his control not a few who pass as friends of the truth, and through them he works against its advancement. He employs them to sow tares among the people of God. Thus, when danger was not suspected, great evils have existed among us. But while Satan was working with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, staunch advocates of truth have stemmed the tide of opposition and held the word uncorrupted amid a deluge of heresies. Although the church has at times been weakened through manifold discouragements and the rebellious element they have had to meet, still the truth is shown brighter with every conflict. The energies of God's people have not been exhausted. The power of His grace has quickened, revived, and ennobled the steadfast and the true. So in this controversy, we want to decide who's a staunch advocate for the truth. Now, of course, Don Adair in Salem has always argued that they're the advocates, staunch advocates for the truth. But we also have to realize it's possible that Satan has his agents that pass as friends of the truth, and they're able to create, corruption and confusion amongst the flock. And we know the legacies of other infamous Davidians, such as Florence Houteff and her legacy, Ben Roden and the Branch, M.J. Bingham. So we have to evaluate Don Adair in the same context and find out who's really walking in harmony with the original Rod Message. So that's our goal here. So we're going to look at the evidence based on experiences, and that which has been published and taught by Salem over the years. So here's a brief historical timeline of Don Adair and his experience as a Davidian. He came into the rod message in the early 1950s through the labors of Ben Roden. And a lot of this is recorded in a book he published called The Davidian Testimony, and that's still available. He attended DLI training at Old Mount Carmel Center under Brother Howdah from 1953 to 1955. He was not authorized to be a hunter in the hunting campaign. That was a testimony from Sister Bonnie and others. He was an associate with Dudley Goff, who was a former Davidian that was in the DLI at the same time. So Don Adair was well known by people from back in this period all the way up to the present day. He was a participant in the pivotal 1961 reorganizational session held in Arlington, California. This is where Bingham, M.J. Bingham, and Brother Warden opposed Florence Howdah and called for reorganization of the association and to get back to the original shepherd's rod and oppose her multitude of errors. So he was part of that, we'll see. From 1962 to around 1967, he was a close associate and pupil of M.J. Bingham. He was literally his right-hand man. This is something that when I studied with Adair, he didn't really talk about much. But it's a recorded fact. The people at Bashan will acknowledge that. And so he was influenced by Bingham's theology, as we've demonstrated in prior videos, especially on the Those With, which we'll talk about. He broke away from Bingham and joined the Vista Association, which is out in Southern California, and relocated to Salem in 1970. And he assumed a prominent position of influence as a Bible worker and a chairman of the session that was held in Salem in 1970. And we have records of all of this documented, the symbolic code for that time. So that's where he really came into influence around 1970. And then took control over the Salem Association. He kind of wrangled it out of the control of the Sump Smith, who was the leader, and got voted in 1974, and he became vice president. And it's a position he's maintained or held ever since then, up until around 2020, when he began to lose. He's up in his 90s now, so there was a big fracture in Salem, and the question is who's going to take over, and that's an ongoing dispute. We're not going to get into that here, maybe in a future video. He introduced into the Davidian fold a large compiled green book, and then later it came out in 4 volumes, where no more tracts, the original pocket-sized tracts, were published. This started around 1990 or so. He also compiled the symbolic codes into a single blue book, which has included the new code sermon addresses. So these books were quite well known. For example, for many years, Waco and Mountaindale got those books from Salem, even though they tried to hide his name or cover it over with their own addresses. My first copies of the Shepherd's Rod Volume 2 I got from Waco, but they were really from Salem. And he was the only source of Shepherd's Rod Volume 1 and 2, actual facsimile reproductions, original format, for many years. That's no longer the case, but that was the case for certainly during the 70s, 80s, and 90s up into the 2000s. And he's also published several other books under various titles, and we'll look at some of that. So that's a brief outline of his legacy, if you will. And we're going to look at some more details. Now, here's the 61 session in Arlington, California, where what they called themselves 100% rod-only Davidians broke away and separated from the errors of Florence Howdah and her renegade executive council, and also Ben Roden and his bogus branch. So in this photograph, I have arrows over some of the prominent figures that would later play big roles in the Davidian movement as we move forward into the later years. Over on the left, far left, you have that gentleman, M.J. Bingham, under one of the red arrows. And next to him, Jimmy Bingham, his second wife, his unlawful second wife. So they became the part of the trajectory of the Bashan Hill dynasty, if you will, the successive Porter president legacy. And then now it's in the hands of Trevor, since the mother, Jimmy, has passed away. So they played a role. Under the green arrow in the back, that's Brother H.E. Warden. He was kind of the hero that held together the original association in the 1960s and 70s and preserved the original literature. We have that all well documented in a series on the history of God's storehouse in 6 parts. You can check a link in the description box below. And then, of course, out in front there under that red arrow just below Warden is the young Donnie Wayne Adair, who was there in that session. So yes, he does have a story, and he tells that in his book, The Davidian Testimony. Now, the Salem Headquarters, how did that come about? Well, really it arose in the 1970s and pretty much existed in this format until about 2012. You had the sign there, this custom designed sign that he made to distinguish Davidian, the association, from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, calling it an upshoot to avoid trouble with the trademark issue. The Seventh-day Adventist Church trademarked the name Adventist in the 1980s and used it as a weapon to silence various what they considered offshoot ministries. So Adair got heavily involved with this. He was involved in a court case to protect the association. So this was that origin of the sign. This is what the so-called headquarters looked like. This was a building that was built by Glenn Green to serve as a Davidian rest home. And the story behind how Don Adair got this is kind of interesting, but it was sitting on 8 acres, and it belonged originally to Glenn and Rose Green. Glenn Green married Rose Green, whose family was local in that area, that part of South Carolina, all the way back before the Civil War. And so Rose inherited a portion, about 8 acres of this original family homestead that went way back. And the circumstances by which Don Adair got control of it is rather unusual. And so I'll tell that story here. Don Adair, when he moved out with the Salem Association in 1970, he was looking for a position of influence as a leader. The vice president at the time was Sump Smith, part of the Smith family. And Don Adair, according to interviews and reports I have, went about to the other Davidians there and was fomenting discord, questioning Sump Smith's loyalty to the message and charging him that he was following the doctrines of Florence Houteff and so forth, to arouse suspicion. And he was angling, or if you will, to become the next leader, as they believed, the vice president, following Florence Houteff model. And the story was that he called a bunch of Davidians that were living out in Southern California that he had won in while he was living out there in Riverside area. And he told them, well, the association says you move out here and we'll find you a place to live and we'll find you jobs. And apparently representing the association. So a group of the Garza family moved out there, and then the Muellers, of which Marilyn Mueller became Don Adair's 3rd wife, and also her brother Craig Mueller. So they all moved out there in the early 70s and voted and nominated Don Adair to become the next vice president. So they were a voting bloc, and he became vice president, I think, 73, 74. And this created a lot of hostility with the Smith family, and they kicked him out of the Salem rest home. And Don Adair didn't have anywhere to go, so he ended up going out to Glenn Green, who was living out here at this property about 6 miles away in Tomasi. And Glenn Green took him in, and Don Adair persuaded him, well, those people down at the rest home are no longer following the rod message. They're following Florence Houteff. They don't believe in witnessing to Laodicea anymore, so we got to reorganize up here. And so he convinced Glenn Green to deed over the property in the name of the association. So Glenn Green did. And so that's how Don Adair got out here. But then later, and I interviewed Glenn Green on this, there was a disagreement. Glenn Green disagreed with one of Don Adair's teachings. Don Adair, once he got control, he used the symbolic code to introduce his various doctrines. And one of the big ones was Ezekiel River. We'll talk about that a little more, going east. And there were some Davidians that didn't agree with that, including Glenn Green. And when that dispute came about, Don Adair basically threw him out, cast him out. And so Don Adair got control of this property. And this is recorded in property deeds in Oconee County, South Carolina. And so it's not really clear that, so like I say, the circumstances we got this property a little questionable. After he maintained this as the Salem Headquarters and basically ruled from here until about 2012. And this building, this structure, caught fire and burned to the ground. This is a small community, so one of the relatives of the Smith family was on the 911 emergency call and got the call at like 4 in the morning or so from Don Adair, and were told another Davidian who went out there and was there before the fire department showed up. So there's a whole story behind that. Maybe I'll tell you some about that sometime. But the circumstances about why did this catch fire? I think it was a warning call. God was trying to wake some people up here. But at any rate, Don Adair was determined to, rebuild. But this structure got destroyed. And currently, the office complex is now no longer occupied. It's in severe disrepair. And we'll look on the next slide here. Here's the fire, and there's a picture from the local paper. You can see the building was obviously completely destroyed. We look in this Google map, this overview. This kind of shows you the current status. That red arrow there, that's the rubble or the remnants of their original building. It got burned to the ground. The books at the time were stored in the next building, so they got damaged, some of them, but not completely. They lost a lot of inventory there. Everything was on site, all of their, the big green books, the blue books, and so forth. Adair relocated to some mobile homes next door, and that's in the next arrow. These are a couple mobile homes side by side, or end on end, and that's where he relocated his headquarters for his office, where him and the wife, Marilyn Adair, were staying. They were the resident councils, they called themselves. And so those mobile trailers had been there for years. I remember in 2000 I saw those there. They were kind of run down, but they were there apparently to house what they believed to be people that would be relocating there, which never really materialized. On the third arrow up at the top there, those two trailers there, those are 18-wheeler trailers, and that's where Don Adair stored all of his books after the fire. I actually went there one time to buy 10 volumes of Shepherd's Rod Volume 1 and 2, and he took me into those buildings because he would publish the books, like maybe 5,000, 10,000 books at a time, and store them in this facility. Now, the current situation with Don Adair's estate and the deceased wife, Marilyn, is those trailers are actually deeded to outside the 8 acres. They were on 2 acres that belonged to Marilyn Adair. So who actually owns those books is a kind of an issue of legal dispute at this current time. But that's where Don Adair kept the Salem publications. So this was a big event. Now let's get into the principal doctrines of Salem, or really they're peculiar, some of these to Salem. They're not unique. Some other people share these. Those with 144,000. This idea that there will be more than 144,000 saved alive from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, this is a teaching that Don Adair, and I've documented this in a video. You can check a link in the description box below. But this was a doctrine that Don Adair inherited from M.J. Bingham. Bingham called it the non-lineal descendants. And the whole story behind why Don Adair pulled this doctrine out of the shoebox, if you will, in an effort to maintain control of Salem against the prominence of Anthony Hibbard, a Bible worker under Salem at the time. That story I kind of tell more in the Those With video. But this doctrine, the question is it true or not? Now, I used to believe it because I studied it with Adair as a new Davidian, but later I encountered Davidians from Mountaindale who do not believe this. They believe that those with are those who die in the faith of the three angels' message, and resurrected in special resurrection. Now, Adair teaches that, but he also adds on this idea of more than 144,000 saved alive. Now, this is a huge controversy amongst Davidians. So Adair uses this. One of the first things, if you come into contact with him, is he wants to convince you of this. It sounds good, but the question is it true? We've done our own research. We concluded the rod says no. there are only 144,000 saved alive. So this is a big issue of division amongst Davidian groups. Of course, Bingham, Bashan believes it. Lennox Sam people believe a version of it. They call it others saved. So this is a, like I say, a big wind of doctrine that divides Davidians. Of course, Mountaindale and Waco do not believe in a living those with. Another big one, he focuses a heavy emphasis on, he wrote a whole book on it, the Assyrian Confederacy, this idea that God's people are to go out and oppose the Confederacy during the Jonah phase of the message. And so all of this teaching is very well documented, comes exclusively from the unauthorized New Code sermon addresses. So this is another point of big controversy. Of course, this is also shared by Mountaindale and Waco because they emerged from Salem later in the 1980s. I've all documented that. So this is another doctrine that Salem teaches that many Davidians don't support. Going east, the idea that there's the movement of God's storehouse from California to Waco to Salem according to the flow of the rivulet or the river in Ezekiel 47. This is what split a lot of people in the 1980s or 70s when Davidians opposed Don Adair's teachings in the symbolic code after he became vice president, and that led to the formation of the Yucaipa group. Now, Mountaindale is supportive of the Ezekiel 47. It's still applicable now, today. Waco does not, because it contradicts their relocation back to Texas. But they think the whole thing's only in the kingdom. But we recognize that this is truth, this teaching of Salem is a partial truth. There's more to the story. And we've documented that in a video, in the link in the description box below in Ezekiel 47 for more details. But yeah, this is the one that Don Adair will look at some of his graphics to emphasize that 3 locations are movements of the storehouse. We believe there's more, but that's another one. Here's a big one, that the vanguard will be gathered for the solemn assembly out in the woods adjacent to Salem Headquarters in Tomasi, South Carolina. Now, this 8 acres that Don Adair acquired from Glenn and Rose Green was adjacent to the National Forest there, which is thousands of acres. So Don Adair, I remember walking with him in the woods, and he would say, well, this is where the 144,000 are going to be gathered for the solemn assembly. And at the time, I didn't really have the means. I was a new student. Now we've done detailed studies on the solemn assembly and found this to be incorrect, and we have a link in the description box below if you want to find out more about that. But that teaching comes really from the new codes, from M.J. Bingham, who got them almost exclusively from the new codes. So once again, another issue, and also the idea of who's the vanguard. So this is one that Don Adair would talk about face to face on a regular basis. This kind of make you feel special. Well, Salem's God's headquarters, and we're going to be the vanguard type of thing. Give you that assurance, that you're in the right place, right? Also, another one that he would share was this idea of a private visitation, that Jesus was going to come directly to you, and you're at some point you're going to get the seal, and then you're also going to be assigned which tribe you're of. Remember, the 144,000 are descendants of the 12 tribes, and then of each tribe there's 12,000, and then of that you're going to get the tribe and then the number that you're in that tribe. Now, this might sound a little strange to you, but that's what Don Adair would share with people. I guess you call it inside studies. But anybody that studied with Salem will verify and confirm this, and we've talked with many people that have been associated with Salem in the past. So these are some of the things that you would say, by the fruits you know them. What do you teach? Well, this is some of it. This is all verified. I have notes on it, and this is well known for anybody that's been associated with Salem. The question is it in harmony with the original rod? And that's up to you as an individual to decide for yourself. We've come to our own conclusions on that. Another topic about how does Adair's method of study, this is one that most people, especially they have not met Don Adair, aren't familiar with. Even people that support Salem have never been there and studied with him, but I studied with him for 9 months, like on the average about 2 to 3 times a week. So I'm very familiar with this method of study, and it is peculiar, and I'll share some insights with it. His studies were convened It took place for about 1 hour. Very systematic, almost like a college lecture, only so much time. They were high-level pace. Okay, very, lots of references. They necessitated expert note-taking. Now, I took notes, and it was barely all I could do to keep up and write down the reference and then a couple comments or two or key words. Lots of references giving, a short time for questions, usually at the end of the study. And then there wasn't a whole lot of dialogue or discussion after that. He would usually conclude the study, we'd have a prayer, and then he had to get back to his office because he was very busy on the computer or taking phone calls. He interacted with most of his people through the phone. He would talk about it, Sister Eva called, or Sister so-and-so called, or Brother X called. So that's how he entertained or maintained a lot of phone studies, as he called them. And then he spent a lot of time working on computer graphics, and we'll show you some of those here shortly. His topics tended to focus on what he called deep studies, on topics such as the Confederacy, going east, headquarters, those with, and etc., with a heavy emphasis that Salem's God's headquarters, and then he would talk a lot about usurpers, these other Davidians, Bashan or Roden or Mountaindale or Waco and so forth. What was interesting is, as I was a new Rod student, I was reading into the Rod. I asked him at one point, well, Brother Don, when are you going to show us how to give, basic Rod studies, like using the charts? And his answer was remarkable. I remember it vividly. He says, oh, well, we leave that up to the students to do on their own. We here at headquarters do, quote, deep studies on topics such as the Confederacy and usurpers, articles, and so forth. So no basic training, no basic studies on Shepherd's Rod study charts, no mechanics of how to give a study, how to deal with contradictions, and all of that. We were told these studies that the students had to learn theirs on their own. And I was a little disappointed by that because I was there to learn how to, give Bible studies and teach the Rod. So this was, I guess you could say, a disappointment at time. Really, it was a red flag. There was so much emphasis on these doctrines that now we've come to find out later were not in harmony with the original Rod. So he spent a lot of time trying to build up these doctrines that are unique to Salem. Another unique aspect that it's hard to appreciate unless you were really there is before Don would give a study, people would show up. It might be myself, another brother, of course his wife. There was a brother there, a brother Joshua, that was living there in one of the trailers. I lived 6 miles away, so I'd show up there. So there may be 4, 5, 6 of us. Occasionally there might be a visitor. There was a truck driver once that showed up for a weekend. But before he began to study, Adair would often come out of the office and ask a leading question or make a comment. And this was designed to get those of us, the students, to some conclusion about a former Salem member, an individual that had disagreements with Salem in the past. For example, I'll give you 2 illustrations. He'd come out and say, well, there are brothers, there are Davidians that don't believe in the new codes. He'd just make that statement. And we go, well, why wouldn't they believe that, Brother Don? Oh, well, they began to question and doubt them, and, they led off on their own, and they began to challenge the teaching of the Rod, and, now they're off on their own. They're no longer part of Salem because we're here to defend the original Rod and teach the truth. Really, Brother Don? Well, who would that be? Oh, well, there's a brother that, John Adair. He used to be with Salem, but, he he went his own way, and so we had to separate ways. John Adair. That name stuck in my head. Well, for the rest of the story, I later met John Adair. And it was interesting. I attended a session at Waco before I went to Salem in 2000, a brand new Davidian, studying 2 weeks. And I saw all these people there, all this controversy in the parking lot. It was Mike Smithson, dressed up, claimed to be Elijah the prophet. I mean, there were other people there passing out stuff. Waco was trying to cover tracks and protect us, I guess, from Davidian offshoots. But one of the individuals there, unknown to me, was a gentleman and a woman that were Anglo. They're white, and they stuck out because at the time there were about 300 people there, but most of them were Jamaicans, islanders. They were black. So this couple stuck out, and they were passing out a little tract, and I took a copy. And I was told, oh, you don't want to read that. Well, I kept it. Little pink tract. And it was called Which Trumpet, or as the sixth trumpet began to sound. I found out years later that that man was John Adair. And that particular tract, I never read it until years later, the whole new code controversy came up. Well, it's interesting because that tract was circulated around Waco the year 2000. Well, interesting, about 2 years later, two Davidians, part of Waco, Lennox Sam and Michael Graham, did research, and they presented evidence to the Waco session in 2002 that they said, well, if there's a problem with the trumpets, is there other problems? And they presented, I think, 5 or 6 pieces of evidence that, hey, these new codes got problems. They contradict the original rod. And so Lennox Sam likes to claim credit that he's the one that got into this, but no, there were other Davidians, John Adair being one of them, and there were other Davidians in Florida that began to notice inconsistencies between the original rod and the unauthorized new code sermon addresses. So this stirred the pot in Waco. And then later, when we got involved with UPA 7, I was confused about the new codes. I thought the format, they'd been published by Salem in the past, they'd been published by Mountain Hill, but there wasn't a consistent format, and I couldn't figure it out. Couldn't find an original. Well, by providence of God, I was visiting Salem, and Sister Bonnie gave me this DVD. Oh, some Davidian sent this to me from Waco. And I said, what is it, Sister Bonnie? She goes, I don't know. Something about the new codes. She didn't care about it. Wasn't interested. So I took this, and then later I was impressed to listen, and it was Lennox Sam presenting about the problems of the new codes. And I'm like, oh boy. And I thought, maybe this is it. So I immediately called him and began our own research, got permission to use their research, him and Michael Graham's, and we then made our own position statement that as publishers restores the original rod, we would have no part of the new codes. So it's interesting how John Adair had a part of that. And then later I met John Adair. He contacted us, and I met him and spent a whole day with him and got his side of the story. So it's an interesting little tidbit. But this was the John Adair that Don Adair was trying to prejudice in her mind that he was a bad guy because he didn't accept the new codes. Well, it turns out he was on the right path for those of us that recognize the new codes for what they really are, as unauthorized sermon addresses published by the Authority of Florence. That's one example. Another one is, a brother that was living nearby would not show up to studies very often. And so Don Adair would come out, well, where's Brother Dan? Well, he should be here. Well, Brother Dan is he still with Salem? So he was planting seeds that, well, there's something wrong with Brother Dan because he wasn't attending the studies all the time. And so this was one of the things, and he would bring up stories about various individuals that they had trouble with, Eleanor Sorensen, or there was another guy. So many stories, and I've met many of these people later. One of them became a branch Davidian, but Adair would talk about these people that had formerly been associated with Salem, but they had to get rid of them because they had disagreements on topics. Well, that's only one side of the story. And so Don Adair was trying to lead you that all these people were troublemakers and they had to get kicked out or whatever. And it turns out that I myself, because I saw things going on there and dared to challenge Don Adair, that I myself found myself disfellowshipped or cast out of Salem, and my tithes returned. And so I wasn't the only one, wasn't the first nor the last. But this is just a unique aspect of his approach. He was trying to influence people that Salem's the place, and all these other people that have been associated with Salem are somehow, on the wrong path. For example, Salem's current website publishes an absolute falsehood that myself, when I separated from Salem, demanded their mailing list so I could contact their members. Well, that's patently false. I did no such thing. And I've been in contact. I'm telling them, remove that because that's a lie. It's not true. I left Salem and never looked back. And everything that we've done we've never sought out Salem members and tried to persuade them one way or another. They contact us, then yes, we'll talk to them. But at any rate, something inside story. Perhaps you appreciate how things worked. Now, Adair put together a lot of composite artwork and study outline, and this is an interesting one that he put together. This is on the new Salem website. I'd never seen this before, but he's taking symbols or portions from the rod charts. For example, the 7 churches, and he numbers them 1, 2, 3. It's on the top, 1 through 9. So the Jewish church, the apostolic, 1 and 2, and then the 7 churches in Revelation chapter 2 and 3. Number 9 being Laodicea, and then the 10th church being the kingdom church, the pure gold. And this is all in harmony with things that are published in the Shepherd's Rod. And then he lays on top of that, or underneath it, the various calls from Matthew 20 chart, the first call, the third call, 6th hour, 9th hour. And he takes elements or symbols from the various charts and cuts and pastes them in. And then after the 9th hour, of course, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, where the 3 angels' message are, the sealing of 144,000, and then emerged the 11th hour, and this is parallel with the Kingdom Church. And then he includes elements out of track number 6 about the 2 olive trees, and then the Bible, Spirit of Prophecy, the 2 sheep and the young cow, the Bible, Spirit of Prophecy, the butter and the honey, and its effect during the loud cries. So it's kind of interesting where he cuts elements and bits and pieces out of the charts to put together an outline. Is it right or wrong? I don't see any obvious doctrinal errors, but the question is, well, are we authorized to do this? We see Rodin doing this with the branch, taking symbols or elements out of the original rod and then putting it on their literature, and it creates confusion, and it makes it look like there's a succession of the original Shepherd's Rod, but they're not. They're a counterfeit. So I think this type of practice can lead to confusion. Is this an original rod piece of artwork? And the answer is no. It's a creation of Don Adair comprised of fragments from original Shepherd's Rod charts. I think the safe and sane procedure is stick to the original and so forth. So this is one thing he did. Now we'll see where this lends to a more dangerous, obvious trend when it comes to the charts. And this is where we see some charts with considerable modification. Now the one over on the left, King of the North, King of the South, was a Don Adair creation. This was never an original chart. Now, he takes these graphic images from track number 12 and orders them. Is there any doctrinal error? No. But this was never an original chart. So it's important to distinguish that this study chart was a creation of somebody else other than Victor Hadoff. But this is where, when we get into the original charts, or the so-called, that we're looking at 2 examples here, the 7 trumpets and the temples. These are counterfeit charts. How do I know? Well, we've republished the original, and we find 2 major deviations. If you look at that red arrow, you see the various paths, starting with the first trumpet, second, third, and fourth, and you come around. By the time you get to the 7th, you have 7 lanes for each trumpet, and you notice each lane, it's variating. It's cross-haired, or kind of a grayish color, then white, then gray, then white, this alternating thing. Compare it to the original. That's not the original. These are altered. The original doesn't show this. It's all gray up until the 7th trumpet, and then after that it's pure white during the period of loud cry. So somebody changed it, and Don Adair doesn't hide this. It's no secret. His wife, Marilyn, traced this with onion skin over at Don Adair's original chart. So they made the modifications. Don Adair did. So this is not original chart. Now this is really amplified in the controversy over the golden bowl in the temple chart here. The question is, how many of you got 2 pipes taking oil from the olive tree, put it into the golden bowl, Spirit of Prophecy, but how many tubes are taking oil out? This particular one right here shows 7. And under that arrow, that's a 7-1. Don Adair added that. He freely admits that. If you go and look at all the original artwork of the Golden Bowl, found in Shepherd's Rod Volume 2, Answer Book, TGs, track number 6, and the original large charts, they all show 6. And we've proven that. We've got a video in the description, and the link in the description box below that's covered that in great detail, comparing side by side. Now let me go back to the prior image, this composite artwork that Don Adair put together probably earlier in his career. You notice up on the top under 10, there's the Golden Bowl, the 10th church candlestick. Notice how many pipes or tubes are taking oil out. It's only 6. That is an original. Okay, but you go forward here, this chart he did later, probably in the 1990s. He added the 7th tube, and I remember him, eyewitness, commenting, "Oh, well, Brother Houteff basically implied, made a mistake, so we corrected it." Really? Don Adair freely admits that. And people have asked me, I said, call him up. Now you can't do that anymore, but several Davidians have called him up, and he freely admitted that they added the 7th tube. Who authorized him to tamper with inspiration? That's a serious charge. So this is the problem when you begin to make up your own artwork based on the rod. You should leave it alone. So this is an area of considerable concern and also considerable controversy. It's been well documented in the past. So he also created his own artwork to support Salem Doctrines, in particular this idea of going east. And so if you look on here the left, you got the period of Carmel pasture, and he likes to focus 3 headquarters. The start, 1930, Los Angeles, California. Then they moved to Waco, Texas, 1935. That's irrefutable. But what happened to the storehouse after Brother Houteff died? And of course, Adair argues that it ends up, the last place is in 1970, Salem. Literature reprinted. Well, yeah, it was, but by 1990, Salem was no longer printing the tract literature. It was compiling it and selling in a big green book. I asked him about that once. I said, Brother Don, why don't you print the tract? Oh, well, blah, 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 but we made it more convenient for Davidians to get it in a single volume, and we can mail it all around the world. So he justified tampering with the original format. Dangerous thing. You go to the next one in the middle, in Gedi. This is based on Ezekiel River. Once again, 3 headquarters, Los Angeles, Waco, and then ending in Salem. Our argument is that that's correct up until about 1974, but Adair doesn't tell you the rest of the story. There was a split, and that headquarters relocated back in Yucaipa to continue alive the original tract literature. And then Yucaipa later joined Mountaindale, who had been kicked out by Salem in the early 80s, and then they merged in 1986 up in Mountaindale, New York. And Mountaindale kept the original literature alive up until about the year 2005. No longer kept the original literature, so that's why UP7 had to rise up to restore and maintain the original literature. So this movement back and forth is more extensive. Adair cuts it short. And then the chart on the image graphic on the left, he shows the message starting in Maine and with Ellen White's ministry, and then concluding in California, and then resuming and after her death in 1915, 15 years later, 1930, the Shepherd's Rod, and then it moves to Waco 1935, and then to Salem 1970. The only problem with this is it's used to justify Salem, but it doesn't tell you the rest of the story. It doesn't talk about, well, what happened to the storehouse after 1974? Well, it went back to California and then up to Mountaindale. Now, Mountaindale, it's gone worldwide. And to this day, there's publishing houses being established worldwide as we speak. So this is Don Adair creating graphics to really emphasize and justify Salem, Salem, Salem. Now, one of the things he's done, by the fruits you know them, is he started in 1990s, he compiled all the rod. He no longer published individual pocket-sized tracts. And this is a big, huge deviation from the message. So he sold the green book. Later in the 2000s, he divided it up because this big green book, anybody who's had a copy, it falls apart. It was a big, bulky thing, not easy to carry around. So he split it into 4 paperback volumes. And once again, sold them at a cost. When they were supposed to be distributed without cost or obligation, they were marketed for a price. The blue book, the infamous blue book, was the old codes, but he also included the unauthorized new codes, so it's contaminated. And here was a list from their old website. The cost for the books, $50 for the green book, $40 for the blue book. Now this has all changed. Now Salem's being transitioned, and they're selling the books for, once again, the same books, but for more money. But they don't. The bottom line is they don't print the original tract literature and spread it as the leaves of autumn throughout Laodicea without cost or obligation. So they're going directly against the mandate in Isaiah 55 verses 1-5. And commented on throughout the rod. He also has other publications, Fall of Protestant Nations, America, King of the North, his personal testimony, Davidian testimony. Now the first two books I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. They're heavily edited or commented on, and we'll show you how that works. But the Davidian testimony does have some interesting history in it. It is very biased. It's his perspective, his story. Sister Bonnie called it Donnie's ego trip. It is. It's all focused about Don Adair and justifying Salem. He later, his magnus opus is this huge index to the original writings of Shepherd's Rod. We're going to show you how that works in a minute here. But what can we learn from this? Well, Adair's book contained heavily bracketed commentary on most Rod statements to bolster his private ideas, especially on topics such as the Assyrian Confederacy, those with the 144,000, Salem Headquarters, and so forth. And I'm going to show you here shortly how he did this. And then many of the Salem doctrines rely exclusively on references coming from the unauthorized New Code sermon addresses. So if you look at his index to the writing, you'll find hundreds of citations to the unauthorized New Code sermons. So you can say the index is definitely contaminated with the New Codes without question. In the next little clip, I'm going to show a video analyzing how he does this commentary, his commentary. It's a very subtle trick, but it's extensive throughout his publications. And I'll show you how that works. And then afterwards, we'll come back into our PowerPoint here. Okay, so we want to take some time here to show you or demonstrate how Adair goes about carrying out his study. And we're going to pick, for an example or an illustration here, out of his scripture index, his study on the Assyrian Confederacy. So this is what he titles Searching S-Rod References to Study About Assyria. Now this gives the appearance that this is all from the original rod, but it really isn't. So I want to show this to you. So he has an index of abbreviations for Ellen that he uses. Under the explanatory notes, I want to point this thing out. Item number 1, it reads, some words in the rod were added in brackets by the author, V.T. Houteff. That's correct, and those are part of the rod message. However, this is where it gets interesting. Next sentence, he said, the editor of this index, which is him, Don Adair, also added keywords in braces. The braces there to most of the sentences so they could be located elsewhere much faster. And this is the point I want to bring out. Adair's use of braces is how he inserts ideas, how he understands the rod. So, for example, when he goes to 144,000 in his books, he will always put in braces after that, and those with, leading you to believe that there's more living saints besides 144,000. So this is how he uses braces to insert his ideas, or basically tell Brother Houteff how to teach his message. Now, in the references or the abbreviations for the sources, of course, he has rod tract material, tracts 1 to 15, answer books, and so forth. But I want you to notice down here, under the symbolic codes, he's listing symbolic code volume 10, 11, 12, and 13. And these are the unauthorized new codes. And we want to see to what extent these influence his thinking on this subject of Assyria. Now, this is a very comprehensive index, and so he has all these subtitles, 1 through 31, everything to do with Assyria, starting with the ancient kingdom, item 2, broke papal confederacy, so forth. So under these subheadings, I want to highlight a couple in particular to show you how he uses it to introduce ideas that are only found in the new codes, not in the original rod. So item 11, Assyria sets up a confederacy. This idea of the Assyrian confederacy, which those terms do not exist together in the original rod. It's only found in new codes. And then item 12, confederacy as snare. So we're going to scan down there and look at that in a little more detail. But as you go along, one thing you'll notice here is it talks about Assyria. He'll list these sentences and then the source material, the original, the rod reference, and then references to his books, the large green book and the blue book at the end. And what you'll notice if you just glance over that, a lot of references to the rod, especially track 14, but he will also include references to the new codes. So some places like here, Assyrian number 2, broke papal confederacy, you see references to track 14 and then also 12 symbolic code number 1. Those are the two primary sources. So he mixes in new code content, unauthorized new code sermon content, and then you see how he puts these brackets in here. For example, many years since, Assyria in bold, and then after it in brackets, Protestant nations. So he's inserting this content, and he does this in his books. So sometimes it's correct, but sometimes it can be an avenue or a venue to introduce his own ideas. And it's very subtle, but this is the methodology. Now I want to scan down here to the subheadings under the Confederacy. That was 11 and 12. So you can see here there's just a colossal amount of references. It looks like this is everything. This is the final authority. But the problem is it's original rod references mixed with unauthorized new code stuff. And we're going to see that here in item 11, subheading, Assyria sets up a confederacy. So you see here probably, on the order of 30 references, and notice what they are. Most of them are new code. 13 symbolic code number 3, lots of those. Track 14, 12 symbolic code number 1, and those are the primary sources. So you see here in this section, it's over like 60% new code references. And then when you get to item 12, confederacy is a snare, everything comes straight out of 13 symbolic code number 3. So this is where some of these ideas come from. He has this heavy emphasis on the confederacy, the Assyrian confederacy, but most of it comes from the new codes. So what you're talking about here is an index that is a mixture of original rod references contaminated with unauthorized new codes. And this is the avenue by which Salem's doctrines are introduced, which we consider to be heterodox or contrary to the original rod. So you see here the heavy use of brackets, Assyria, bracket, church state. So everything, I'll highlight right here, all these references, 13 symbolic code, it says the, and then brace, Assyria, and then the next brace, church state, confederacy commences. Okay, so every time the word confederacy, he wants to insert the word Assyria, and then church state. And I'm like, wait a minute, the rod, if you go to the original rod and search the word confederacy, it's never associated directly with the word Assyria or Assyrian confederacy. It doesn't exist in the original rod. So all of this is introduced through new code references and is pushed by Salem and Don Adair. So this is significant. This is the mechanism by which he basically tells Brother Houteff how to teach his message and weaves in his own understanding coming from the unauthorized new codes. So that's how it works. Let us take heed and study only the original. Okay, where does it stand today? Well, Salem continues to publish the unauthorized symbolic codes, not only a blue book, but now they have symbolic codes. Here's volume 22, January to March 2023, where they continue on this legacy along the lines of Mount Dale, Waco, Lenox, Sam, publishing really unauthorized codes, which creates confusion. I mean, we should stick to the originals that Victor Houteff published. And after that, there's no more authority to publish any codes. All it does is create confusion. Florence Houteff showed us with her codes and all the confusion. And so we dare not go that direction. But Salem continues on talking about their doctrines, their news, their updates, issues with their headquarters and splits and all that. So I guess it's interesting history if you want to find out what's going on with Salem. But in terms of authoritative sacred canon of the rod, no. These are not original codes. So they continue on with that. So what can we learn from our analysis or our study, our summary? Well, Don Adair's legacy as Davidian leader is characterized by corrupted publications, altered study charts, power struggles for leadership, and a continuous conflict with other Davidian groups, which he calls usurpers. He has a series of articles called Usurpers, where he calls out Roden and the Branch and Bingham and Bashan Hill and Waco and Mount Dale and anybody that disagrees with him. Now, certainly Roden needs to be called out, and Bashan as well. But anybody that disagrees with Salem is a usurper. And he, of course, tells stories about Mount Dale. And it's interesting, when I first married my wife, who was a member of Mount Dale, I asked her to read Adair's book, The Davidian Testimony. And she read it, and about halfway through, she said, "This is a lie." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" She said, Don Adair says here that Anthony Hibbert taught that only 144,000 will be saved alive from the entire world. That's not true. I said, "How do you know that?" "Well, my wife was won into the Shepherd's Rod message by the personal studies of Anthony Hibbert, who used to travel to Connecticut and study extensively with my wife. And so she knew exactly what Anthony Hibbert taught. He taught in harmony with the rod that there's to be first fruits, 144,000 only from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and then they would gather second fruits. But Don Adair twisted it and tried to paint the picture that Anthony Hibbert was teaching only 144,000 saved alive from the whole world, which is obviously not true. It was a falsehood. So after that, my wife said, "I'm not going to read this book," and threw it down. And so that's the danger of, calling everybody a usurper. You can't bear false witness, because that would be a sin against God. And so that was an example that I discovered. Don Adair's turning away from publishing the original Shepherd's Rod tract literature to focus on large compiled volumes for sale is contrary to the mandate given in the Shepherd's Rod message. If you doubt me, just look at all the comments Brother Haddock commenting in Isaiah 55, 1-3. You'll see that there's no mandate to compile and sell for cost. So this is an area of huge concern. It's an obvious soft spot. When I challenged Adair with it, that was one of the issues that he had problems with me, in other aspects, is I wasn't accepting his justifications. And so if we're going to follow the rod, then we better follow it to the letter and print tract-size literature and send them out as leaves of autumn without cost or obligation throughout Laodicea. Adair's studies are a combination of correct teaching and corrupted doctrines. For example, his teaching on antitypical King David, I have the notes, is 100% correct. However, when you get into other topics, it's truth and error mixed. So this is where we get the trouble, especially those doctrines greatly influenced by references from the unauthorized New Code. Sermon addresses, I showed in that video clip, how on the Confederacy, he makes extensive use of New Code references, and this creates controversy. This creates a problem. As Adair's tenure is essentially complete, it appears that his legacy will be continued by a small band of loyalists focused on his unique doctrines. They've got a new website. They've got a Sister Judy and her daughter who are taking over, and some brother Obi from Zambia that's coming over to become their new vice president, and so forth. Under these circumstances, its reconciliation with other Davidian groups is very unlikely at this time, so we'll continue on in a divided and splintered state until God steps in and separates wheat from tares. So it's up to us individually to decide where you're going to stand. Our appeal is stand on the original Shepherd's Rod as 100% rod-only Davidian and add nothing or take nothing away from the rod in every detail. So that concludes our presentation. If you have any further questions, comments on this subject, then please subscribe to this YouTube channel, Universal Publishing, for future updates on this and many other topics related to the advance of the original Shepherd's Rod. If If you'd like to request copies of the original tract literature or the charts, or for assistance to set up an original Shepherd's Rod public house in your area, in your country, then please feel free to contact us anytime. Our email, phone number, you can text or connect with us on WhatsApp, or visit one of our websites, yparish.org, where we address this and many other issues relating to controversies amongst Davidian groups. To ask that question, well, why so many splinters? Well, it's because we don't see eye to eye, and the question is, who's following the original? And so you'll have to decide that for yourself. Meanwhile, we encourage you to seek for truth as for hidden treasure, and to cease ye from man, whose breath is in his nostrils. Godspeed.